Maybe we should start with the presentation that on the design, and maybe the comments of the process and the significance of the project being the first.
Maybe I could just start by just a mere introduction about the West Kowloon. If you remember, the history of Hong Kong was that in 1982, Deng Xiaoping announced that China's sovereignty is going to return to China. Then, of course, the market took a dive, and then wasn't stable until about 1984, when we had the Basic Law. Now, at that time, Hong Kong's economy was very, very shaky, and government actually then thought we need to have something stimulus to boost the economy. So David Wilson at that time announced in late 1980 that Hong Kong is going to spend spend 26 billion US dollars building the new airport, and the airport's going to be at Chat Lap Kok. And related to that airport is going to be all the infrastructures, including the airport express rail, the bridge over Qinyun Ma, going to Lantau. So all that sort of thing happened, and it did boost up the economy. Now, as a result of building all those new infrastructure, was a piece of land which was as a reclamation of the harbor, which resulted in the West Kowloon site. Now, at the West Kowloon site, after 1998, when we had the Asian financial crisis, our then chief executive, Mr. Thom, went to one on the roadshow to promote Hong Kong. And he went to Singapore, and he explained what Hong Kong is doing, and he talked about West Kowloon and all the developments going to go there. And Singapore got so nervous. Singapore said, wow, Hong Kong is going to have this West Kowloon. What are we going to do? So they brainstormed, and then they come up with an idea, was that they're going to introduce gaming into Singapore, which is very new, very unheard of. Now, the gaming business in Singapore is up and running, and we are just starting now. So we're a little late, but we're going to catch up. Thank you.
I can't talk sitting down, so I have to move around. So I thought, because it's such an honor to be here tonight with all of you, and we're all architects, that we would talk quite frankly about this project that Ronald's company and our company are doing together as partners. We were very fortunate to have won the competition. So this is an excerpt of the competition entry, but then I've added a lot of work of what we're doing right now as recently as yesterday. So I just thought it would be interesting for all of you to kind of follow the process a little bit, because we're all in the same field together. When we won the competition in the entry, I developed 4 themes about the idea of the project that we're doing. First is the idea of the garden in the city, because in Chinese culture, there's never been really a separation between nature and human settlements. It's always been seen to be a holistic dialogue between the human world and the natural world. Is never seen as a kind of only through human eyes. It's always seen the eyes of nature and human beings together. The idea of courtyard and marketplace. This is an art form that's really of the people, from the people, very much like flamenco, until Garcia Lorca came along and reinvented it, and then it became the national art form. I'm quite convinced that I think eventually Xiqu will be the major dominant Chinese art form internationally, recognized as being uniquely Chinese in many aspects. It occurs in marketplaces, it occurs in places of courtyard, in religious quarters, and then eventually sometime retreated into private homes and palaces. But it never lost its connection with the common people in the public spaces. This next one is about gateway and pavilions, and it's one of my favorite slides, actually, because this one on the left shows that people actually come in by boat, and they enter through the center. They then turn around, and the stage is above them. That itself talks about the holistic aspects of this art form. And this other one is a courtyard, and once again you come in through the lower level, you come into a courtyard, and you turn around, and the stage is once again above you or enveloping you, if you like. This whole idea of transition and flow is so much a part of my sense about what Chinese architecture is about, and more specifically the idea of qi, that spaces always have to breathe. This art form is dance, drama, singing, and acrobats, all in one. So it's very much what we call performer center. One table, two chairs, that's it. The performer has to hold the audience together. It's like architects giving a talk with no slides, right? When you're not very good, you need the slides. But if you're really good, you don't need any slides. You can just talk, right? And so this is unique in this art form. And so we have to think about, well, what is going to happen in the future with technology? And will all the gadgetry and everything else come along? Because right now it appeals mainly to an older audience. And what do the younger audience want? And I use the example of Clint Eastwood, who was an actor, now became producer, director, because he got tired of being told what to do by other people. Because art form moved from performer center to director centers. And then the artist, the performer, just ended up becoming a servant of the director. But it's not like this in Xiqu, in Cantonese opera. It's the performer, it's himself or herself are the center of the show. And the performance is not really to an audience. The performance is to a space within about 12 inches of the person. The performer is actually to the inner self. You have this also in theater, in history, where Stanislavski talked about acting naturally, like being the part of the actor. But Brecht came along and said, no, we want to stylize. We want to, and Xiqu is stylization. The gestures are all very much prescribed. And so it's very unusual to find that the rehearsals are actually only 20 minutes before the show, because the roles themselves are so much a part of the performer that you're either, you have typological roles that you don't cross boundaries from. You become a performer of a set. And that set has its rituals and gestures, probably much more like ballet, where there are so many, you do your pirouette and you do your fifth position, third position, whatever. These are all very prescribed, and Xiqu is like that. And so this is a very unique art form that will possibly develop. But the search here for us as architects is not so much what will change, but what will not change. Because what will not change is much more important towards reaching the truth of what this art form is about. So as an architect then, given the thought about these themes, how do you weave that all together to create a building? So the challenge here is, wrong button. Okay, the site. We know it's at the edge of the property. The Foster plan indicated avenues terminating at Canton Road. It's also knowing that there will be circulation from the high-speed rail coming from China. We know that people will be able to come for a performance and have dinner and still go home for dinner. So the idea that right now we're reaching maybe 6, 8 million, 10 million in Hong Kong, but in the future, in a very short time, the catchment area is going to be 30 million, 40 million. And so it's really a different way of thinking about what this facility will be and the draw that it could have. And also then we said, okay, it's also very much related to Kowloon Park and its dialogue with both the harbor and the park itself. And so when we're thinking about the project, we then kind of realize there's kind of a diagonal on this site that has this wonderful view of Victoria Harbor and Hong Kong itself. The site itself is here. We were asked to also suggest the development across the way. So these two buildings will become a pair, but the first phase is really this building. And by the way, there's a fire station here that's not going to move for 15 years or more. So I've been trying to say to them that, we have to be careful because on opening day, where you're going to cut the ribbon, because the fire station is going to sit right in this area, and the front door is actually right here. But the transit, the MTR, comes out at this location. The trains from China will be coming through a noise mitigation deck, a bridge that can be coming over, the main avenue itself terminating, actually requiring people to take diagonals through this site. So the movement of diagonal is actually quite important to resolve the axis on the site itself. So we came up with the idea of actually lifting the theater up. We actually broke the rule of the competition. The competition from the Foster plan said that you had to put the theater on the plaza. But we felt that was the wrong move because it just wasn't going to work very well. 3 of the 5 competitors actually did break the rules. We weren't the only one. So we lifted the theater up, the big theater up. We created a public plaza or a public space lower here with a tea house, with an experimental theater, and then the program I'll explain later asked for a number of facilities. And then on that, we then wrapped what we call a curtain around the facility to create a enclosure of a certain type. So then it creates this kind of form that both becomes an inner space and an outer space at the same time. So the program asked for a theater, a tea house, educational facilities, rental rehearsal space, administrative, and more retail spaces, because 30% of the area are going to be retail, because the retail would then earn the income to sustain the operating costs of the facility. So the way we zoned it, we put the connection to the MTR and the retail at the lower area. We then brought administration and a small tea house on the upper area, and then above that we have education and the experimental theater, and above that the opera house itself. So it's kind of stacked up on many levels. And if we look at it more carefully how the circulation would work, there are a number of cores. This is the MTR station coming out through here. We then took that route up to bring people up through the circulation to education. We really felt the facilities during the daytime will have to be enlivened by the education. And we want to bring the students through the public space, not through some back door or some other avenues, so that this public space itself will always be activated. And then, of course, the public circulation to the tea house, the experimental theater, are all brought up through circulation with escalators. And then administrative control, we have areas for the artists, we have areas that we're going to have for the VIPs, areas for the administration. And then the other service corridor, of course, in a performing arts center, it's very important to get the services right directly to the performing venues. And so the adjacency of all the different facilities to the service corridor becomes very important. And then, of course, landscaping, because of this axis coming through, we had to terminate it, we felt, in the future with a very dynamic fountain, and then taking the diagonal across back to the other parts of the city. And so from Canton Road, as you come in, you would then see the kind of expression of the building with this curtain-like enclosure, and as you come in further, you discover this kind of public space with probably stage, areas for cafes, some restaurants on the upper levels, and of course these escalators then will take you right up to the top, to the opera house. This is kind of inspired by the movie, Crouching Tiger, flying, that you're actually flying through the bamboo forest. And then, of course, into the tea houses themselves, which becomes theater of entertainment, probably more traditional, these tea houses would be. And then, of course, some renderings of what this tea house environment could be like. And then in the upper theater itself, when you get up to the top, there are gardens at this level, gardens at that level, changing rooms in the back. Even the changing rooms are very different than what we know of changing room, because the performers change actually on stage. There is the camaraderie of together. And so the idea is that will they ever use these private rooms, or will this, they have their own trunks, right? The performer own their own costumes, right? So they move in with their own trunks. And the trunks are stored in a warehouse, but when they know their certain roles, they all have a dresser. And the dresser actually sometimes is paid as much as the performers themselves, because the dresser look after the costumes, right? So as this center develops, will this change? Will it become more company-owned costumes rather than individual-owned costumes? So these are all questions that we have to try to resolve in thinking about how this building will act. And then, of course, from the lobby and intermission, there's a view back to Hong Kong, Victoria Harbour, this wonderful view itself. And so there you are, the section of the building coming out from the MTR station. So it's a series of gardens. You know, it's like climbing a mountain and discovering the temple at the top, which is also related to that first idea that I showed you, where country and city are actually, and nature and the city are all intertwined. So it's not really a building as a building. It's just a building with a series of levels enveloped with a kind of curtain. And then, of course, in the big theater itself, as you come in, we created gardens on both sides. How will this garden act in this opera house? There's the thought that can you bring daylight into this space sometime? Because, you know, in the traditional bamboo theater, they are performing in the daylight. And so could this be a very unusual opera house that actually has daylight during the days when you have matinees, so that it's a different atmosphere of performing? And then, of course, what is this curtain? And we drew our inspiration from the costumes. And so the idea that, you know, there you have the drapery of the curtain, and then whimsically we kind of parted the curtains at certain places, right? And so we then developed this idea of using tubes of stainless steel at the time for the competition, which then can drape and bend to create these kind of forms that we're talking about, and to allow the building to breathe. The building should breathe naturally. We want the building to naturally breathe, but then, of course, we have this rainstorm that we've had in the last little while, and then we worried about maybe it's breathing too much, right? Where you have to begin to close it up a bit because it could get too much moisture. First of all, I have to say I hate competitions, right? Because competition forces you to make decisions very quickly, and sometimes you get overly committed too early, and then you find the original idea isn't such a good idea, and then you have to talk your way back to the client to say, okay, we've changed it a little bit, we have some other ideas now, right? This is a confession of an architect to other architects, right? And so the idea that we then said, well, this would be a wonderful projection screen. We could project on this building, right? And then, of course, just the night before we were announced we were the owner, we were told by the client, Bing, Bing, you can't do this because there'll be light pollution, and there's a lot of criticism against light pollution. So immediately in the 24 hours, we had to change all of these renderings so that it did not show any projections on the outside. It was much more calmer building. So this was kind of the final image that we presented for the competition. We called it our urban stage. So where are we now? Well, the first thing we did was we said we want to kind of emphasize this idea of the opera house being open on one garden and terminating another garden, and you're actually coming in to the opera house with gardens. So these are kind of very early Revit models that they're awful, right? But it shows the idea we have these huge pivoting doors that are over 10 meters tall that will kind of bring you into the opera house, but yet when you're inside, you actually have a connection to the outside. And of course, you have the usual acoustical issues of sound and light lock, and how do you deal with the sound transparency. So these doors are actually, on the one side, they're absorbent, on the other side, they're reflectant. So depending on the way we want to tune the hall, we can reverse the doors to get the acoustical qualities that we want. And then, of course, there's the new section, lifting up the building, and we created this public space, but actually this public space has become an additional theater. I'll show that a little later. It's actually, we have an opera house at the top, and we also have an experimental theater in the public space. And so if we look at the theater, we now enlarge the stage to become a much larger stage, and then the MTR comes out here, they go out, or they come out and go on, and if you're at the trains from China, you would come through in this direction. And then the various retail levels function as circulation on the upper levels, and the building stacks up as we go. And then, of course, escalator takes you up to the higher levels. And then now, if you can't have projection on the outside, we put projection on the inside. So the concept of the building is like the oyster shell from the outside and the oyster from the inside. They're kind of yin-yang. The outside and inside actually are taking two different personalities. And we retreated away from using stainless steel because a number of people after the show, after we won the competition, came up and said, Bing, you can't use stainless steel in Hong Kong. The salt air is bad. The idea that the ordinary older citizens may think this building's a little bit too slick and becomes intimidating to them. You can over-design this building in terms of its expression. So we've come up with a new kind of thinking, which is expressed by this little item we have on this table here, which really is one of the it's a casting of so the building has become a very different expression. It's actually a much more, in some way, thinking-wise, solid building, but it's actually a softer building. Like stainless steel is too yang, you know, 太陽. When you look at the stainless steel, it comes back at you too fast. This then becomes a softer material. Actually, it's bronze or copper that we're thinking of now. I brought some samples. Architects always have to be tactile, right? So I'm going to bring you some samples to show you. Ronald, if you could pick it up. Just put it up. Yeah, that's fine. Just hold it up. Thank you. Sorry, using stagehands here. Anyway, so the original idea was these kind of round tubes, but once we built it, we hated it because it had no body. It was too. It didn't have materiality, and so the building has now become a very different expression. But as you come into the space, we have now the projection, the ability of projections. Now, those of you who do shopping center, you know, like we don't want this place to look like a shopping center, right? But we do have shoppings on 2 levels. So the idea is that in section, these are the scoops. So we allow about 2.3 meters of glass, but you can't see the glass because these upper parts are where we do the projections, right? So that way we kind of deal with the retailer's requirement as well as giving it so that you know you're on a cultural center. So the idea that for the whole of West Kowloon development, it doesn't have to be just Xiqu. It can be other images. And on Chinese New Year's, you can kind of so the building, I'm trying to purposely allow the building to be messed up. You know, I'm the kind of architect that I don't believe that the building should be most beautiful on the day it's finished. I think owners have to take over the building, and if we fail to educate the owners to kind of learn to use the building, then it's our own fault. So, you know, this famous quote about Frank Lloyd Wright, who went around telling people they can't move the furniture. I'm the opposite. I like people to kind of, but the building has to be strong enough to take the abuse, but it has to have this kind of quality about it. And so that comes back to the outside of the building also. It has to have its own patina. It has to have its own dignity so that it itself will express what it wants to be rather than being told all the time. And then, of course, this is just a seating pattern. So now we've come up to the idea that this now becomes a space for a lot of activity that can happen. And then now, okay, so we got this idea of the screen. Now we got all these funny conditions. You know, some places we have glass. Some places we have the cores. Remember the circulation diagram? The whole opera house is held up by these huge trusses that are 6 meters deep, all in steel. So we build okay. All right, everybody said, well, it's very expensive to kind of put this big building up in the air. So we actually build it on the ground, and then we jack it up. And as we jack it up, we actually building the other floors at the same time. So actually, even though it costs more money to build it in the air, we saved it in construction time, right? So that's how the kind of economics work. So all these different facades, you can see this place we have a big window, this place we have a solid wall. Here we have a transition area between open and semi-open and solid. So how do we create a facade that will answer these different conditions? Because otherwise, light up at night, you're going to get this god-awful bands of lights that don't relate to what the building is like during the daytime. So we now have come up with the idea that we actually took the tubes. Those of you go on the website, you know the Wiley Theater by Ramco House in Texas. They were round tubes. But we took that idea and we kind of reversed it. And we actually, the tubes are now cut, well, and we're actually using only 2/3 of the material. And in that way, even though this feels more solid, because we're using these kind of flat edges that joins the tubes, they are the ones that will catch the light. And so the concave aspect will become in shadow. So then the building actually, even those, will feel lighter, even though it may have a darker color, because there's less surfaces to catch the light. And then, of course, there are these different conditions that we have to solve. And so the issue here was take a condition like this, which is bright light, modulating to very solid surfaces. So maybe we have to perforate some of this area, or maybe in some cases we have to take the caps off to, allow this space to work. So that's another example of how this idea of the tubes turning around could work. And then other places where we actually had very severe curves, we have to modulate to allow, once again, perforation or more opening with more solid, depending on the situation. We actually, within 2 weeks, will have a big mock-up, 10 meters by 10 meters in Kansas City to look at to see if we got it right or not, right? And so here is all the profile of these sections that we've been studying. And then, we'll have to do a new rendering because it's not going to look like that, right? So here we have some samples of these tubes. These are full size, and we will turn them. There are only 3 modules, but there are different gaps. So we design our buildings with a lot of modularity so that we can drive the cost down. But we play the module in such a way you don't recognize the module, because that way then it won't become so boring, right? So in some way we kind of take our inspiration from Renzo piano, but we twist it a bit to kind of make it so you can't tell. If you go into our website, you see other buildings that we do. We play this kind of technique very often in our buildings. Then we're saying, okay, I like it in copper, but maybe we can't afford it in copper. So we're looking at aluminum, we're looking at stainless steel, we're looking at copper, but we now have a sample of actually what's happened to that little round piece? We actually now, no, it's bigger than that. Well, actually, it's a Venolin, where's that other piece? It's okay, don't worry about it. It's actually, we can actually take aluminum, we can extrude aluminum easily. It's very light, maybe less expensive than copper. But if we coat it with nickel, and then we coat it with bronze, we get the material that we want, but we can drive the cost and the weight down. So we're still in this kind of experimental stage, and you're the first public people to see this, but I thought if I get into trouble, I've got lots of architects to help, Yeah. Because for sure somebody will say, well, you've changed the look of the building from the competition. I said, well, I have to, because that's the nature of how the design is developing, right? So that's once over briefly where we are, and so we can return to the conversation. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to have start. I will start with one question that is related to the question of a building that is essentially a public institutional facility. It has a tendency to be an icon. I do know that architects been trained or practiced in the last 20 years has come to a point that really fed up with the idea of icon, but inevitably it will be an icon. Icon has one thing in common, that is, it has to have a kind of singular message. That's really the qualifier of an icon. So, is there a message of a building? I know it's a hard question. I don't think any architect wanted to address a message that's actually qualify a building as an icon, but I think this building is definitely going to be an icon. So the general public, what kind of a message that you either expressed or hide in hidance?
Well, yeah, I don't ever think of my buildings quite that way. I guess I have to, in defense, quote one of my main teachers, Fumihiko Maki, who said, well, if people walk into your building and they walk out feeling a little taller, then you've succeeded. So I think all I can say is I hope when you come into this building, you feel that you've come home, that it is a part of Hong Kong, it is a part of Hong Kong's culture, and the expression of the building is such that I've always said to my staff, people have enough problems in their life without the architects giving them more problems. So I'd like my buildings to be actually quite simple. And if they feel that they've come home, then I think if they say the icon of this building is my home, then I'm very happy.
I guess you've been through the process of being collaborator, and you probably know what Hong Kong's. I do felt there is a social expectation, and particularly related to the ambition of the city. But ambition is also a message sometimes, and it's the clearest. So is coming here as a home is what Hong Kong public expectation.
Well, I think Hong Kong has many iconic items, and I think the majority, the big item, of course, is a Victoria Harbour, and I'm so glad that government is now not doing any more landfill, especially in the center part of the Victoria Harbour. In terms of icons, I think there are lots of icons in buildings in Hong Kong, and we are not out to try to make another icon. I think basically we want to have a building that really reflects the spirit of Xiqu, of what Chinese opera is about, and make people feel that that everything works in here, and government is making sure that everything does work. So it's got to be very, very practical. And if people come here and they do feel the spirit of the building, I think this is what we want to give them.
Great. I guess I have a reflection in that notion personally. I do felt that if a building eventually is going to play a role of pushing the agenda of art to a level of to a higher level, it possibly must take a role of being an iconic piece, because otherwise, I do felt that there's a lot of intelligence that work into the system, but the boldness of being an icon is still there. I like to. I think that's, to me, it is what a building with a cultural ambition must address. And I will leave that to our fellow architects, but I have a very strong sense of iconic quality here. I'm not being negative towards it. As a matter of fact, I personally actually would promote that agenda, and not to really conceal it in a way that is not actually guiding through the process. I have a sense where the process gets very, very detail-oriented, extremely intelligent in addressing all this. Maybe a bold, iconic move help to resolve all this endless. Giving you an example, all projects in Beijing are iconic to a level they all have a nickname. So the general media in China, it's basically have been tackled on this kind of nickname phenomena of every building. But I personally think that's great. That's what Chinese culture is. As a matter of fact, in Xiqu's tradition, everyone actually does have a nickname in the team. You probably so I do feel there is this kind of a very fruitful connection there. But I guess my second question has something to do with the challenges of institutionalized Xiqu as a presented in this way, because Xiqu is really, as you've shown, is really a public phenomenon. One of the very interesting thing about Xiqu is actually very few of audience actually would sit through a Xiqu in the old days. Each one of them catch a little bit because the Xiqu is played for 100 years and everybody knows the story, and you really just capture one piece. Then you buy your fried rice and you come back, listen a little bit, and the kids were just running around. So in a way, Xiqu itself has this coherent presentation, but the audience is never really get the totality. But putting in this form, there's really a kind of sense of totality of Xiqu in this form. How do you how is that part of the thinking process?
Well, this is a very much of an ongoing debate, because even if you look at Western theater, actually it started out as a people's theater. Elizabethan theater, where people are theater of the street. And then somehow when theater were brought into places of entertainment, then audiences were taught to sit still. You can't drink, you can't bring food, you have to sit, and you have to sit politely, and you have to dress a certain way. And so there is this tendency now, even in the Chinese opera groups we meet in Hong Kong, who are saying, well, we have to now train the audience so that, I say, well, that maybe is the Western tradition, but maybe it isn't a tradition. You should go, but well, we don't have any choice because, we have the Sunbeam Theater, which everybody's used to. We're not going to just build another Sunbeam. Surely we're going to build something more than that. So the struggle has always been even simple questions. The row-to-row distance between your rows to the row in front of you. If you have to get up halfway through to go to the bathroom, is everybody else going to have to stand up? Because this audience is an elderly audience. And they tend to go, anytime they have to go. So they said, well, can we have a wider row-to-row? And then we said, well, but that's then at the expense of the intimacy of the room. So we now have to create the balance of how much can we allow for this movement, and how much do we want to create the sense of intimacy. Sight lines, for example, in the theater tradition, you want to bring the audience as close to the stage as you can, and therefore, if you go to Western opera, they stack them up on 6 levels so they can get the room tighter. But in Xiqu, it's different because the action is frontal. The action is two-dimensional. There was talk about at Basel. I mean, they still have the exhibit on Christie, but when you look at Western art, traditional Western art, the paintings are in very elaborate frames. The elaborate frame is the tradition of the magic box. You look at the painting and you think you are in the place of what you're looking at. Chinese painting traditionally has been frontal and flat. There are no frames. Reality is what you see. And so the whole issue of what is entertainment, what is theater, the Xiqu performers are moving in lateral. There are very little diagonal movement. Western opera houses are stacked up because the set design, you're looking down at set design in a sense of perspective. The whole issue of the proscenium arch is there is like the picture frame, right? To kind of take you out of reality into another world. But Chinese art has never been about taking you into another world. When you look at a Chinese scroll painting, it's flat. The dimension, the presentation is flat. So this issue of transition from where we are today to where we think we will be tomorrow, to to where we were 100 or 1,000 years ago. Western theater, contemporary theater, broke out of the proscenium march to come into the audience, which is what Xiqu has always been for thousands of years. And now, if you go to Sunbeam and we talk to some of the presenters presently, they retreated back behind the proscenium. And we're saying, no, you have to come back out. And they're saying, well, we're used to be behind the proscenium. We're used to using microphones. We don't sing naturally anymore. We need all the gadgetry to keep up with the new generation. Expect the sceneries to change. They expect the lighting to change. And so we said, well, then you're moving to director center rather than performer center again. So all of these discussions are ongoing with the stakeholders that we work with.
I know you want to add on.
I think you also have some tea houses that allow people to have that flexibility.
Right. Yes.
So we'd like to talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I think in the program, as I mentioned, there's one tea house and there may be a second tea house, and the idea there is that both tea houses could be different. One may be very traditional, and so actually you could actually come in and see the performers doing their makeup and actually participate in that. The other one might be more for poetry and for calligraphy, or as a smaller intimate situation. And then we have the opera house at top. So the idea is to present a series of venues that have different characteristics to allow for this evolution, because there will be new experimental Xiqu shows that will come from China, that will be developed locally. That's why the educational component is so important, that, that it has to be an engine for new creativity, not just preserving what was. In fact, that to me is actually more important. That's why the educational component is actually put right into the center of the project, and having the students actually activate the center all the time.
Great. I have the last question has something to do with technology on two levels. One is that Xiqu is, as you were expressing, that is really developed in an open space, right? So the sound is generated by the centric figure, and the sound goes away. So the reverberation is very short. In other words, people hearing a passage of sound quickly away. In other words, Xiqu is very loud, extremely loud, because it doesn't reverberate. And that's where the Xiqu's really trick is, very short reverberation and really goes away. But theater in the Western form is reverberation. It's all about reverberation. It's developed in-house as a, as really the kind of cultural development. So how, I guess there's definitely the technology challenges. Has that been a discussion through? And another specifically related to the project, the other level of question on technology is still relate back to the idea of icon. A true icon, besides having a nickname, but also push technology to a new level. In other words, this building would not be fulfilled without a technology that transcend the ability of fabrication or construction. Are those issues also being part of the discussion? I guess that's
right. I think I'll ask the first question first, and then yes, I think there's definitely a lot of focus right now on acoustics. How do we formulate this room? Interesting enough, one of the most difficult part of the acoustic is actually the orchestra pit. Now, traditionally, Xiqu musicians are on stage. They're not in the pit. But what's happened, evolution over time, they're now expected to be in the pit. Sometimes they're on stage. But the pit design itself is a problem, because the percussion instruments are so loud that people in the first 4 or 5 rows actually have a very difficult time. So we are now trying to design the pit in such a way that we hold the percussion sound forward and not allow it to go back, to the extent that one of my staff that's here now, who's moved back to Hong Kong, she's a percussionist for a Western symphony, but I said, well, you better learn percussion instrument for Chinese, and we are actually seriously thinking about developing new percussion instruments for the use for this hall because they've never had this situation before. Now, the second issue has to do with technology. Actually, we're working with Zahner as one of the developers for this facade who does all the work for, you know, Gary, you name it, they do the facade for everybody, for Herzog de Maurian. So they were here 2 days ago working on this facade. He said, this is the most difficult facade we've ever had to deal with. We've never had to deal with it quite this way before. And I said, well, that's good, because if it was, we wouldn't want you to do that. But then in talking to the client today, first thing they said, well, that's what scares us, because you're going to do something that's never been done before, and that's great. I said, well, that's why you had international competition, and that's why you want us to do something, because we would be failing you if we just took a safe route. I mean, architecture and good art is always talking about coming to the edge, right? This building, it's actually, I would be happy if the building has dignity. You know, it will have its presence so that you look at it and you say, this building has been here for at least 100 years. But the technology we use to achieve that is actually very complicated. Because when I said to them, if the facade is successful, this building would look like it's casted, not formed by sheets. So the joinery of between the curve and the flat and how we push the metal out in the extrusions to make the transition is going to be, and then of course it got all these curving edges. So in terms of the back part, there's going to be a swivel that's going to have to put in with every piece to take the curves. So it's got a long ways to go before we get there yet, but it's probably the most difficult. We've done performing arts centers before, and so yes, it's Xiqu, but we kind of know. But in this facade, we don't know what we're doing at all.
Ronald, you want to add on that?
Not yet, anyways.
I mean, I think definitely will be iconic. Yeah, I think we're very, very excited about this project. We still have some way to go. But I think the very good thing about it is that we have worked very closely together. We're working really well together. And the moment, I think a lot of balls in the government's court as to how we bring this forward a little bit more.
Actually, speaking personally, the best compliment I ever had recently, at least in Hong Kong, was from Brian, Ronald's son. He said, "You're just like my father," he said.
Well, with that, great. That's really exciting. I do felt a great project. It's always a journey that you explore. Obviously, there's a goal as a project, right, as a public facility, but as you explore to reach the goal, and then you actually discover great possibilities. With that note, I'd like to open to our audience and have questions. And okay, I saw. Do you have?
With no doubt, this is going to be iconic. My question to you is, how is architecture, now being iconic, is going to respond in this age of mass media and instant communication? Norman Foster's first design was very iconic. The icon was torn down before we realized what the building is. Your building would be experienced by a lot of people who's not going to walk in physically into using your space to experience what you designed for them. They're going to experience you through the media or through many cyberspace or any other means. Now, how is the practice architecture and the design going to respond to those changing, mainly because of technology, and change the social institution? You're not going to avoid this issue. This is going to splash all over. I'm so happy it has not been torn apart yet. Where are we in implementation? And if those things are going to change, how is it going to respond to it? Secondly, with respect to technology, we are going to see very rapid change in technology, which is breaking down society. Is the purpose of the building is slow down and provide comfort for us society to deal with technology, or is it just going to respond to whatever the latest technology is going to demand from you?
You want to that's loaded, but
well, I'm searching for authenticity. You know, to me, what we're lacking today in our globalizing world is we're forgetting what we are deep in our own soul. I'm trying to search for the soul of Hong Kong. I'm from Hong Kong, so it means a lot to me. I'm born here. To try to find something that really speaks to people. And so the choosing of the material and the form comes from that search. I think technology will always come and go, but people essentially don't change. And so this building to me it's just another layer of clothing that people will wear. And I want to feel the people to be comfortable in that clothing. I don't want to impose on them. Yes, the building will have its own characteristics. It will have its own personality. That personality is set by the circulation, by the use of disposition of forms and issues. But in the end, we show this idea of this projection on the inside. We all know within 10, 15 years, there'll be some other new toys that somebody will come along with, right? That will, and my greatest fear is to allow technology to date the building. The building has to transcend technology, and the way I do it is to appeal to the basic human spirits of people's personality themselves, the desire to be together, the desire to celebrate, the desire to be proud, proud of what they have. Okay? But that is, to me, a very subliminal artistic endeavor that I try to do, but I don't talk about form so much. The form comes out of an understanding of that sense of the self and the being, the soul of the building. You know, we have to hold on to that. And the soul of the building is this idea that you come into this magical space that you have a certain sense from the outside, but you come in, you finally discover something that you never thought would be there because the inside is so different than the outside. In fact, when you come into the building, there's no building. You're just enveloped by the space. And then as you come up the escalators on a different level, hopefully you will discover a series of gardens. Each garden will have its own personality. The gardens where the tea houses are will be different than the gardens where the educational level takes you to the Grand Opera House. So each of these journeys of discovery, and I don't want you to figure out all in the first trip, and I don't want to be that consistent. In fact, I want it to be sometime inconsistent, because then you'll come back the second time to figure it out. It's like what I said about the modules. If the modules were too obvious, you look at it and say, oh, I figured it out. You won't come back again. We'll purposely make the module in such a way that you can't figure it out, and then you'll keep coming back. Right?
I saw another hand.
Hi. I think this project is definitely a landmark project for Hong Kong. I think prior to this, I don't think you see any cultural building being built by anyone other than the government architect themselves, and that's why we have all these winning design with some of these cultural buildings in Hong Kong, like the Central Library, and you have. How do you think the process has been working with this project and versus other projects that you might have done, other competition you might have done elsewhere?
So addressing a friendly audience, fellow architects, in fact, I think this is something I feel is a bit of a tragedy in Hong Kong. that there's not enough independent voices speaking up, like the AIA. For example, there's no doubt there's tremendous pressure now because of the handling of the budget for the whole of the West Kowloon through a series of whatever situation. But I think, you know, voices have to come forward to say, we are talking about culture. We are talking about the next 100 years. We're not talking about the next 10 years. Don't dumb this down. Don't dumb the vision down, because it's not a short-term project. And it's about time for Hong Kong and Hong Kong people to say, it's more than just about money. It's more than just about money. Money does not bring happiness. Money does not, we need culture. And culture is so important. And we have to hold on to that. And as architects, we have to speak out. Because, you know, I can say this in Canada, I don't know if it's true in Hong Kong or not. We have, through our education and through our licensing process, we have been given a monopoly to practice. But that monopoly comes with it a certain privilege. That privilege is a responsibility. And the responsibility is not whoever pays us. I always say that to the client. You happen to pay me, but you're not my client. My client is the people who are going to be inhabiting these buildings for the next 50 to 100 years. That's our true responsibility. And I think these voices have to come out in Hong Kong now, because this is a very crucial stage of, because if Hong Kong doesn't keep pushing ahead, we have tremendous advantage in this region. And we only have another 10, 15 years to kind of keep pushing this way. Otherwise, Hong Kong will lose its unique position in the world. Right? You're not just one of the major financial centers of the world. You will be the major financial center and art center of the world because of Big Brother next door. And like it or not, that's going to be happening. And most people in the world know it. But people, Hong Kong people have to stand up, and people in this profession have to stand up for what's happening. Because these buildings are very, very, very important. And I feel so privileged that in my life, I'll be able to come back and do something for my place of birth. Right? Because it's for the next 100, 200 years. It's not just earning some fees. It's much more than that.
Great. Architecture does have that role to actually push the social agenda and actually represent the independent voice as a creative force. And I guess all of the fellow architects are very encouraged by that. And that's exactly the voice that actually needed around the world. Los Angeles being actually another major city lacking that, and all the architects actually working outside the city, and the city is being kept very dumb in many ways. But there are more questions coming from the audience. Yes, I saw that.
Hello? Yeah, sorry. I think that the image of the curtain that you present is really captivating, and it seems to strike a nice balance between being very humble and deferential and only parting to allow certain spaces to be revealed, and also allows very bold formal possibilities. But what wasn't clear to me was how open is that public space down below? Is it a weather-sealed lobby space with multiple entries, or is it an open plaza, maybe the way it's open beneath the HSBC? What level of openness or control or weather tightness is there?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because we really push very hard to allow this building to breathe naturally. And so it's not air-conditioned, it's just a naturally ventilated space. But we are using excess air from the spaces that are fully air-conditioned to kind of, so it's a semi-treated space, but it is intended to be an open public space. So it's not going to be glass enclosed. It's going to be allowing air to flow through. And obviously, we're going to have to do a lot of wind tunnel tests to make sure that it's all going to behave properly. So we're now starting these wind tunnel tests to kind of make sure we handle the air movement in the spaces. But luckily, we have very good mechanical engineers working with us, and we feel that it's quite doable. Yeah.
Great. I will take the last question. I think our panelists will also stay a little longer, and we can continue to have dialogue privately with them when we get off the stage. So, is there one more question? Last question? Great.
When you say your audience is elderly, I'm a little bit worried. You're building this fabulous building for opera. You know, do you think your building will serve as an impetus to revive the history, the opera culture?
No, this is very much the goal. That's why the educational component is very, very important. You see, this art form, whether it is in China or in Hong Kong, is actually at a very tender period. Because you think of young people, you know, it's actually only the very poor that actually come into this profession, because there's such a push towards education and professionalism, etc., etc. And this is still a very folk art form. But how to elevate this so that people can be proud that this folk art form is actually a very high art form. So that has to be done through the school systems at a very young age. So the performers have to be encouraged to go out into the schools so the building is actually just a vehicle for transformation. And so, yes, Dean Ma, buildings can change people's lives. They can be inspired. And if the building is a good building, it will inspire many young Chinese opera performers to say, I want to be a professional performer because I like this building. Right? So it has happened to, at least for me, many of my buildings, people have come up and said, you have changed my life. I have been inspired to go to university because of your university. So as architects, you know, that's fantastic. That's more than any kind of accolade or awards you can get, that you've changed one person's life. That's enough.
Great. I guess I'm going to close the discussion with a note that architecture, it does matter still. Yes, because as the economy really giving us such a, I wouldn't say just frustration, desperation last couple of years, sensed very strongly from the education angle. We struggles every year to recruit, to fundraise, and to really kind of putting the best program and in the education, still educate young creative designers that actually expect to change the world through the very creative process and eventually leave something behind as the evidence of that creativity. I always joke with on campus, you know, we have engineering schools who are flourished with a mind that think they're going to resolve all the problem in the world, and then MBA students that think that they're going to make a lot of, no, not making a lot of money for them, but actually make the world much richer. I always believe that architects could resolve the problem, simultaneously leave something behind that's very beautiful. We don't resolve problems creating more problem afterwards. That tends to be what our engineering brothers fellows do. They do resolve, but then they create new problem to be resolved again. So I guess a problem come to architects, we settle it with beauty, right? So with that, I so look forward to actually, as you all are, to visit the building when it's completed and ribbon cut. Thank you so much, and thank you for your attendance. And I'm going to...
I want to thank all three of you for a wonderful discussion. I have to agree, building does change lives. I was not going to do nonprofit work after 10 years, but falling in love with this building has changed my, life in the next couple of years. But thank you, all three of you. Look forward to seeing West Kowloon and your buildings. And I know, I think all of you, if you all feel like I do, I think you're doing wonderful, all three of you, wonderful visions, and Hong Kong is very lucky to have this building. So thank you so much.